Stay with me until the very end, and make sure to subscribe, because what happened to me will make your blood boil and your heart race. My story begins with a single phone call that shattered everything I thought I knew about family. I was in Lisbon, volunteering at a medical outreach program, when my stepfather's number lit up my screen. I almost didn't answer. He rarely called unless he wanted something. But curiosity won. "Hello." My voice was calm, tired after a day of work at the clinic. His voice came slick and smug. "Evelyn, I sold the lake house. You should thank me, it was for the greater good. My debts needed clearing." I froze, the phone pressed tightly against my ear. The lake house. My mother's sanctuary, the only piece of her legacy left after she passed. My fingers trembled, but my voice didn't waver. "You sold it?" "Yes," he said casually, as if he had just returned a shirt to a store. "You were never around to take care of it anyway. Besides, it's just a cabin. Wood and nails. Don't get sentimental." Then, with a cruel little chuckle, he added, "Hope it works out." I didn't respond right away. Instead, I let the silence stretch across the ocean between us. He mistook my quiet for defeat. That was always his strategy: bully with arrogance, feed off chaos. But what he didn't know, what he would never understand, was that I had prepared for this. When the call ended, I stood by the rain-streaked window of the volunteer center, staring at my reflection. My face betrayed nothing. No panic, no fury. But inside, a slow fire began to burn. That cabin wasn't just a structure, it was my mother's dream, built with her own hands, plank by plank, nail by nail. She had bought the land before she met him. It had been her escape from him, her proof that she could carve a piece of peace out of the world. And now he claimed to have sold it. I placed the phone down carefully, as though it were a glass that could shatter. Around me, the building was silent. My team had already gone to rest, leaving the soft hum of Lisbon's night outside my window. My breath was steady, my body unmoving, but my thoughts were a storm. For years I had watched my stepfather, Daniel, manipulate people with ease. He wore charm like a mask, convincing neighbors, even friends, that he was respectable. But behind closed doors, he was a leech. He had drained my mother's finances, mocked her ambitions, and tried to control me after she passed. He never succeeded, not fully, but he never stopped trying. The cabin had always been untouchable. It was in her name, protected. Or so I thought. As the hours passed, I made my decision. I would cut my trip short. My flight home left the next day. The journey felt endless, Lisbon to New York, then the winding drive north to the Adirondack Mountains. Each mile tightened the coil in my chest. I thought of the scent of pine, the creak of the porch steps, the way the lake caught the light of dawn. I thought of my mother's hands sanding the wood railings, her laughter echoing in the still air. That place wasn't just property. It was memory. It was blood. And Daniel thought he could erase it with a forged signature. By the time I reached the small mountain town, the autumn air had sharpened. Leaves clung to the edges of the road in bursts of orange and crimson. The streets were familiar yet changed, new shops, new faces, but the same rhythm of small-town life. I stopped first at the county records office. My hands were steady as I requested the most recent deed. The clerk, an older woman who remembered my mother, raised her eyebrows as she slid the folder across the counter. "I thought you'd be the one selling, not Daniel," she said. I didn't answer. I opened the folder. And there it was, my name still on the deed. My signature. My mother's before mine. No mention of Daniel. No transfer. No authority for him to sell anything. A smile crept across my lips, slow and deliberate. He thought I would scream, that I would beg. He thought I would collapse. But instead, he had walked straight into a trap of his own making. The cabin wasn't his to sell. It never had been. I closed the folder and thanked the clerk, my heart steady now with cold purpose. I stepped outside into the crisp air, lifting my eyes toward the distant ridge where the cabin sat hidden among the trees. Tomorrow, I would go there. Tomorrow, the confrontation would begin. And Daniel. He was about to discover that I was not the broken girl he remembered. I was the woman who had come back to reclaim everything he had tried to steal. But little did I know, someone else was already inside the cabin. Someone who thought they owned it. And when I arrived, they would be waiting. The morning came with a biting chill that cut through my jacket as I drove the winding road toward the ridge. The lake glittered faintly in the distance, the sun barely climbing over the horizon. Every twist of the path pulled me deeper into memory, the drives with my mother, her humming to old folk songs, the smell of coffee in the thermos she always carried. The closer I came, the sharper the ache in my chest grew. Finally, the trees parted, and the cabin appeared. My mother's cabin. Or what was left of it in spirit. A truck sat in the gravel driveway, its flatbed loaded with planks of wood and boxes of tools. Men moved in and out of the open door like ants, their voices carrying through the crisp air. I parked at the edge of the property and stepped out slowly, boots crunching against gravel. The scent of pine needles filled my lungs, grounding me. My hands slipped into my pockets as I crossed the driveway, forcing my stride to remain calm, deliberate. Inside, the sound of hammering echoed. Dust clung to the air. The sight stopped me cold. My mother's favorite chair, gone. The rug she bought from a local artisan, rolled up and leaning against the wall, ready to be discarded. Even the old bookshelf, its corners worn by years of use, had been dragged toward the door. They were gutting it, stripping it bare. A man emerged from the hallway, wiping his hands on a rag. He was in his 40s, sun-worn skin, tool belt heavy at his waist. He looked up, startled at first, then his expression hardened. "Can I help you?" I smiled, slow and deliberate. "I think I'm exactly where I need to be." His eyes narrowed. "This is private property." "Is it?" I asked, stepping past him, running my hand along the wooden wall. The boards were cool beneath my palm, but alive with memory. "Who owns this place?" "The new buyer," he said cautiously. "My boss." I turned to face him fully. "That's interesting." His brow furrowed. "And why is that?" "Because according to the county records," I said, pulling the folded deed from my jacket, "this property still belongs to someone else. And that someone isn't your boss." His confusion cracked into disbelief. "That can't be right. The sale went through. Papers signed, money transferred." I shook my head. The sale was fraudulent. My stepfather never had the right to sell it. This cabin was never his. The man shifted uncomfortably, glancing toward the back room where other workers' voices rang out. "Look, I'm just here to do a job. You'll need to take it up with the owner directly." "Oh, I intend to." I folded the paper neatly and slid it back into my pocket. "But for now, you might want to call him. Tell him he has a problem." I walked back toward the doorway, the man staring after me, his knuckles white where they gripped the rag. Outside, the autumn wind whipped through the trees, scattering leaves across the porch. I paused, looking back at the cabin one more time. My mother's presence still lingered in the scent of cedar, in the creak of the porch boards, in the way the shutters caught the morning light. But it was no longer untouched. Someone had already painted over her dream. I made my way back to the car, the man's eyes still on me from the doorway. He looked torn, between duty to his employer and the gnawing suspicion that everything he was building stood on hollow ground. I gave him the faintest of smiles before climbing into the driver's seat. The engine rumbled to life. I didn't drive away immediately. I let the cold air sweep in through the open window, staring at the ridge beyond the lake. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The first battle was won, I still held the deed. But battles aren't wars. Wars are fought in courts, in whispers around town, in the unraveling of a man's carefully constructed lies. Daniel thought he had beaten me with a phone call. What he didn't realize was that his voice that night had only sealed his fate. He had underestimated me, as he always did. And tomorrow, he would learn exactly how wrong he was. I started the car and drove back down the ridge toward the town. But even as the trees swallowed the cabin from sight, one thought lingered with me, sharp and unrelenting. If Daniel was reckless enough to forge this sale, what else had he been reckless enough to do? The town hadn't changed much in the years I'd been gone. Same diner with its flickering neon sign, same row of shops with their faded awnings, same people who always seemed to know more about you than you wanted them to. But beneath that familiar skin, I felt a shift, like everyone was bracing for something they couldn't quite name. I parked outside the records office again, though I already had the deed tucked safely in my bag. This time, I wasn't there for documents. I wanted confirmation, something to stitch the threads of this mess into a picture I could use. The clerk, Mrs. Hanley, looked up from her counter when I walked in. Her eyes softened with recognition. "Evelyn. I thought I'd see you sooner or later." Word's already spreading. "Word about the cabin?" I asked. Her sigh was enough of an answer. She motioned me closer. "Your stepfather swaggered through here last week, waving papers around like he'd struck gold. But something felt off. I knew the name on that deed. It wasn't his. It never was." I set my folder on the counter, flipping it open so she could see the signatures. My mother's, mine, notarized and filed years ago. "He forged a sale," I said quietly. "But he never had the right to do it." Mrs. Hanley's mouth tightened into a line. "That's fraud, plain and simple. The buyer should have checked, but some men think money means rules don't apply." "Who's the buyer?" I asked. "Out-of-towner," she said, lowering her voice. "Name's Grant Whitmore. Wealthy contractor from downstate. Likes to throw money around and expect people to bend. He came in here with Daniel, didn't even blink at the paperwork. Just signed and left, like he was buying a toy." The name lodged in my chest. Grant Whitmore. A man with resources, connections, influence. A man who wouldn't take kindly to realizing he'd been swindled. That was dangerous, for Daniel, yes, but also for me, if Grant decided I was an obstacle. I closed the folder with a snap. "Thank you," I told her. "You've given me what I need." As I stepped back into the cool afternoon air, I caught sight of Daniel's house on the far end of town. Curiosity tugged at me, sharper than I wanted to admit. Against my better judgment, I drove past. There he was. Through the wide front window, I saw him lounging in a leather armchair, a glass of whiskey in his hand. A brand new car gleamed in the driveway. He had wasted no time spending money that wasn't his. His laughter echoed faintly as he spoke into the phone, smug and careless. For a moment, a hot coil of rage twisted inside me. Not because of the car or the whiskey, but because of the sheer arrogance. He believed he'd won. He believed I was still the girl who would cry quietly in her room while he tightened his grip on everything my mother built. But I wasn't that girl anymore. I drove on, past the edges of town, up toward the overlook where the mountains stretched endlessly into the horizon. The air was cleaner there, sharp with pine and possibility. I stood at the edge, the wind tugging at my jacket, my eyes fixed on the ridge where the cabin lay hidden. I dialed a number I had kept for years, my mother's closest friend, Margaret. She had been the one I trusted when I left, the one who had guided me through the legal process of securing the cabin after my mother's death. She answered on the second ring, her voice warm but tinged with caution. "Evelyn." "I'm back," I said. "And it's time." There was silence on the other end, then a sigh. "He did it, didn't he?" "Yes. But he didn't know the papers were still in my name." "Good," she said firmly. "Then you have the upper hand. Don't waste it." Her certainty steadied me. We made plans to meet the next morning, to review every legal detail and prepare for what was coming. Because I knew Daniel wouldn't surrender quietly, and I knew Grant Whitmore wouldn't either. That night, I stayed in a small inn near the edge of town. The air smelled faintly of cedar and old books, the mattress lumpy but familiar in its imperfection. Sleep was restless. My mind replayed Daniel's smirk, his words echoing, "Hope it works out." At dawn, I dressed and walked through the empty streets toward the diner. Margaret was already waiting, her gray hair pulled back in a neat bun, her eyes sharp as ever. She slid a thick folder across the table. "Everything you need," she said. "Every law he broke, every loophole he thought he could exploit. You have proof of ownership, Evelyn. He has nothing but lies." I flipped through the documents, each page a nail in the coffin of his scheme. Fraudulent sale, unauthorized signatures, breach of contract. Any judge worth their gavel would side with me. But Margaret leaned closer, her voice dropping low. "Daniel won't just roll over. He'll twist, he'll fight, he'll try to make you doubt yourself. And Whitmore, he's not the forgiving type. If he feels cheated, he'll come after Daniel with everything he has. You need to be ready for both of them." I nodded, my hand tightening around the folder. "I am." But inside, a flicker of unease took root. Because I knew Margaret was right. Winning in court was one thing. Surviving Daniel's games, and Whitmore's wrath, was another. By afternoon, the town buzzed with whispers. The fraudulent sale had spread like wildfire. Faces turned as I walked by, some curious, some sympathetic, others wary. Everyone sensed a storm was coming. And then it happened. As I stepped out of the diner, a sleek black car pulled up to the curb. The window rolled down. Grant Whitmore himself sat inside, his eyes sharp as glass, his smile razor-thin. "Evelyn Hartley," he said smoothly. "We need to talk." Grant Whitmore's presence carried a weight that pressed against the air itself. He was the kind of man who never asked for a meeting, he summoned you. His suit was perfectly tailored, dark gray with a sheen that caught the weak sunlight, his tie knotted with surgical precision. Even his car seemed to exhale money, the leather interior gleaming like it had just rolled off the assembly line. I stood on the sidewalk, folder clutched tightly in my hands, my pulse steady though my body thrummed with tension. "What do you want?" I asked, keeping my tone flat. "Get in," he said smoothly, nodding toward the passenger seat. "We'll talk privately." Every instinct told me not to. But every instinct also told me he wasn't going away until I did. So I opened the door and slid inside. The scent of expensive cologne mixed with leather filled the space, and suddenly the world outside the tinted windows felt far away. He studied me for a long moment, eyes like steel. "I've been in business long enough to know when someone's lying. Your stepfather lied to me. What I don't know is what role you played in it." I met his gaze without flinching. None. He had no authority to sell the cabin. The deed was never his. I opened the folder and laid the document on the console between us. "This proves it." His jaw tightened as he scanned the signatures. My mother's name. Mine. No mention of Daniel. His hand curled into a fist, resting on his knee. So he conned me. Used me as his golden parachute. I nodded once. That's exactly what he did. The silence stretched until I thought he might explode. But instead, he leaned back, exhaling slowly through his nose. You should know something, Evelyn. I don't take kindly to being made a fool of. I put money into that property already, renovations, labor, materials. Thousands. If I can't recoup it from Daniel, I'll find another way. And if you think holding a piece of paper will stop me, you're mistaken. His words carried the chill of a blade pressed against skin. My heartbeat stayed steady, but inside, I was calculating. Grant wasn't the type to back down. He was a man who crushed obstacles, not sidestepped them. You can come after me if you want, I said quietly, sliding the deed back into my folder, but the law is on my side. The cabin is mine. And Daniel will have to face you in court, not me. A shadow flickered across his face, frustration, perhaps even a hint of respect. You've got your mother's fire, he said finally. People in this town still talk about her, you know. How she built that place herself. How she never let anyone push her around. Looks like that runs in the family. I didn't answer. Compliments from men like him were barbed wire, meant to flatter but also ensnare. He tapped the steering wheel, his rings clicking against the leather. Fine. Then here's what's going to happen. I'll go after Daniel with everything I've got. But understand this, when I'm done with him, I expect you to stay out of my way. If you interfere, you'll regret it. He leaned closer, his voice dropping. And I don't make empty threats. The car door clicked open from the inside. A dismissal. I stepped out into the autumn air, my boots crunching against the gravel. The door shut behind me, and the sleek car pulled away, its engine humming low like a predator retreating only to circle back later. I stood there for a long moment, the weight of his warning settling in my bones. Grant was dangerous. Not because he had a claim to the cabin, he didn't, but because men like him didn't need legitimacy to cause destruction. He had money, power, and anger. A volatile mix. When I finally walked back toward the inn, my phone buzzed. A message from Margaret. Town hall meeting tomorrow. Bring the documents. They'll hear the case. Relief and dread collided inside me. It was moving faster than I expected. By tomorrow, everything would come into the open, Daniel's fraud, Grant's misplaced money, my rightful claim. That night, I barely slept. My dreams were full of whispers, my mother's voice warning me not to falter, Daniel's sneer echoing, Grant's shadow looming larger than life. When morning came, my body felt heavy but my mind sharp. The town hall was already buzzing when I arrived. People filled the benches, their voices low but urgent, as though they knew something explosive was about to happen. At the front, the moderator shuffled papers, clearly preparing for a storm. Margaret waved me over, her hand steady on mine as she squeezed it. You're ready, she whispered. The door opened behind us, and Daniel strolled in, his arrogance unshaken. He wore a pressed suit he couldn't afford, his hair slicked back, his smirk plastered across his face. For a moment, he didn't see me. He was too busy basking in the greetings of a few old friends, playing the role of the triumphant man. Then his eyes landed on me. And his smirk faltered, just slightly. Behind him, Grant Whitmore entered, his presence silencing the room. The contrast between them was almost comical, Daniel all false bravado, Grant a storm contained only by sheer force of will. The moderator cleared his throat. We'll begin with new business. A matter has been raised regarding the recent sale of the Hartley cabin. Dozens of eyes turned toward me. My chest rose slowly as I stood, folder in hand. I have proof, I said clearly, my voice carrying through the hall, that the sale of my late mother's cabin was fraudulent. The deed remains in my name. Daniel Hartley never had the right to sell it. The murmur that rippled through the room was sharp as wind through pines. Daniel's face flushed, but he leaned back in his chair with a laugh that sounded far too forced. Grant's eyes, however, locked on me with the cold intensity of a man watching a chess piece move into checkmate. The moderator gestured. "Present your evidence." I stepped forward and laid the folder on the desk. The weight of the town pressed against me, every gaze burning into my back. Daniel cleared his throat loudly, scrambling to fill the silence. "This is a misunderstanding. I was under the impression." "No," I cut him off, my voice sharp as broken glass. "You weren't under any impression, Daniel. You knew. And you lied." The room erupted into gasps and whispers. Daniel's face contorted, caught between fury and panic. And then Grant rose slowly to his feet, his expression unreadable, his voice calm but razor-edged. "If what she says is true," he said, eyes never leaving mine, "then Daniel Hartley owes me every cent I spent. And I intend to collect." The air in the hall grew heavy. For the first time, Daniel's mask cracked completely. His lips parted, but no sound came out. His eyes darted between me and Grant like a cornered animal realizing the walls were closing in. I stood straighter, my pulse steady now, my mother's legacy burning in my hands like a shield. The battle lines had been drawn. And the war was only beginning. The room at Town Hall vibrated with whispers, like the entire town was holding its breath. The moderator flipped through the papers I provided, his brow furrowed deeper with each page. He adjusted his glasses, glanced at my mother's signature, then at mine, then finally set the folder down with a heavy sigh. "This documentation is legitimate," he announced, his voice cutting through the noise. "The deed belongs to Evelyn Hartley. The sale conducted by Daniel Hartley is invalid. Legally, the cabin was never his to sell." The words hung in the air like thunder. The hall broke into murmurs, some shocked, others vindicated. Daniel's face drained of color, but he forced a brittle laugh. "Now wait just a minute, this is all a mix-up. Evelyn doesn't understand how these things work. There must be another explanation." The moderator's eyes hardened. "The only explanation is that you attempted to sell property you didn't own. That constitutes fraud, Daniel." Grant Whitmore rose from his chair, his presence pulling all attention toward him like gravity. His voice was calm, but every syllable dripped with lethal intent. "Then I've been cheated. And I don't tolerate being cheated." The buyer's eyes locked on Daniel, and for the first time, Daniel looked genuinely shaken. I can fix this," he stammered, tugging at his collar. "We can work something out." "No," Grant said, his tone final. "You'll repay me every cent: renovations, materials, legal fees. All of it. One way or another." Daniel's mouth opened, closed, then opened again, like a fish pulled from water. "I don't have that kind of money." Grant leaned closer, his smile chilling. "Then you'd better find a way. Because men who waste my time don't last long in this world." The moderator rapped his gavel. "Gentlemen, this will be resolved through legal channels. Mr. Whitmore, you may pursue reimbursement. Miss Hartley, your claim is upheld. Mr. Hartley, your actions will be reviewed by the county court." The meeting moved on to other business, but no one in the room was paying attention anymore. All eyes were on the three of us, me, standing with the proof of my mother's legacy in my hands, Daniel, trembling beneath his mask of arrogance, and Grant, seething with cold fury, already calculating how to dismantle the man who had made a fool of him. When the meeting adjourned, people surged toward the exits in a rush of hushed voices. I stepped out into the crisp mountain air, my chest expanding with the first real breath I'd taken in days. But the relief was short-lived. Because I could feel Grant's gaze on me even as the crowd dispersed. He approached slowly, his polished shoes crunching against the gravel path. "You're sharper than I expected," he said. I thought you'd crumble under pressure. Instead, you stood tall. Impressive. I stiffened, unwilling to let his words land. This isn't about me. It's about Daniel's lies. Oh, it's about you too, he said, his smile widening just slightly. That cabin means something to you. I saw it in your eyes when you presented that deed. You'd burn the world before letting it slip through your fingers. He wasn't wrong. But I wouldn't give him the satisfaction of hearing me admit it. He lowered his voice. I'll destroy Daniel. That much is inevitable. But when I'm done, don't get in my way. Stay in your cabin, live your little life, and let me handle the rest. His tone wasn't advice. It was a warning. He turned and walked away, his car waiting like a predator at rest. Daniel lingered near the steps, pale and sweating, watching Grant retreat with wide, fearful eyes. When his gaze flicked to me, I saw something new there, not arrogance, not mockery, but desperation. Evelyn, he croaked, stumbling toward me. We need to talk. I held up a hand. No. We don't. Please, he begged, his voice cracking. I didn't mean for it to go this far. I thought I could fix things. I was drowning, you don't understand. I looked at him, really looked, and saw the truth. He wasn't apologizing. He wasn't remorseful. He was scared. Not for what he'd done to me, but for what was coming for him now. Everything you did was a choice, I said coldly. You chose lies. You chose greed. And now you'll face the consequences. He flinched as though I had struck him. His lips trembled, searching for words, but none came. I turned and walked away, the folder clutched to my chest, my step steady. Behind me, his voice followed, thin and broken. Evelyn, please. Don't leave me like this. But I didn't stop. Back at the inn, I collapsed onto the bed, staring at the ceiling. The cabin was safe. My mother's dream was safe. But Daniel was cornered, and cornered men were dangerous. And Grant Whitmore, he was a storm that hadn't even begun to break. As night fell, a knock echoed against my door. Slow. Heavy. Relentless. I froze. Whoever was on the other side wasn't there for pleasantries. The knock came again, 3 measured raps, deliberate and commanding. My breath caught in my throat as I rose from the bed. I pressed my ear to the door, straining to hear anything beyond the wooden frame. Silence. Who is it? I called, forcing my voice to remain steady. A pause, then a low voice. It's me. Grant. Every instinct screamed at me to leave the door locked, to stay silent until he went away. But I knew men like him didn't vanish quietly. If I ignored him tonight, he'd return tomorrow, or the next day, perhaps not knocking at all next time. He wanted me to open the door, to prove I wasn't afraid. With a slow breath, I unlatched it and pulled it open just enough to meet his gaze. He stood there, immaculately dressed despite the late hour, his expression unreadable. The dim hallway light cast shadows across his face, sharpening the edges of his jaw. May I come in? He asked. It wasn't really a question. I stepped aside, my body taut as a bowstring. He entered, surveying the small room with cool detachment, like he was already calculating its weaknesses. I closed the door but didn't move farther than an arm's reach away. You're brave, he said finally, turning to face me. Most people shrink when I knock. You open the door. Because I know what you want, I replied. He tilted his head. Do you? You want your money back. You want Daniel ruined. You want to make sure no one ever thinks they can cheat you again. A slow smile spread across his lips. Correct. And you know what? I admire you. You're sharper than your stepfather ever gave you credit for. I crossed my arms. Don't compare me to him. His eyes narrowed, a glint of curiosity in them. Fair enough. You're nothing like him. That's why I came tonight. To offer you a choice. I said nothing, letting him continue. You can stay out of this, let me tear Daniel apart on my own terms. Or, he stepped closer, lowering his voice, you can help me. Feed me everything you know about his debts, his schemes, his weaknesses. In exchange, I make sure your cabin remains untouched. I'll even cover the cost of repairs to undo the damage my crew has already done. The offer dangled between us like poisoned fruit. Tempting, yes, his resources could make the fight against Daniel quicker, cleaner. But allying with Grant meant giving him a foothold in my life, in my mother's legacy. And men like him never left once they had a foothold. No, I said finally, my voice firm. The cabin is mine. I won't owe you anything. Not money, not favors. His smile didn't fade, but something in his eyes hardened. You're bold. Dangerous, even. I respect that. But be careful. Boldness has a price. One day, you'll have to pay it. He moved toward the door, his hand pausing on the knob. Daniel is finished. That much is certain. But you, Evelyn. You're still an unknown. And I don't like unknowns. With that, he slipped out into the hall, the door clicking shut behind him. I stood there in the silence, my heart pounding, every nerve alight. His words clung to me like smoke. The next morning, I rose early and drove toward the ridge again. The road was quiet, mist curling through the trees. But as I rounded the final bend, I stopped short. Daniel's car was parked outside the cabin. My stomach knotted. I cut the engine and stepped out, the chill air biting at my skin. He stood on the porch, his shoulders slumped, his suit from yesterday wrinkled and stained, his face pale and drawn. When he saw me, his eyes lit with something desperate. Evelyn, he said, his voice cracking. Please. You have to help me. I didn't move closer. Help you? After everything you did. His hands trembled as he gestured wildly. I made a mistake, all right. I thought I could fix things, but I was wrong. Grant's coming for me, he'll ruin me. He'll take everything. You should have thought of that before you tried to steal what wasn't yours. He took a step toward me, his voice rising. You don't understand, I have nothing left. If he destroys me, I'll be ruined for good. That's not my problem, I said coldly. But his eyes, bloodshot and frantic, locked onto mine. If I go down, I won't go down alone. You think he won't come after you, Evelyn? You think he won't blame you for this too? We're both targets now. The wind rattled through the pines, carrying his words like an omen. And for the first time, I wondered if he was right. The wind howled through the trees, carrying Daniel's frantic words into the cold morning air. I stood at the foot of the porch steps, my arms crossed, forcing myself to stay steady. He looked like a man unraveling, his once pressed suit rumpled, his hair slicked back but no longer neat, his eyes wild with desperation. You don't get it, Evelyn, he said, his voice breaking. Grant isn't like other men. He doesn't forgive. If I can't pay him back, he'll make me disappear. And once he's finished with me, do you think he'll let you walk away untouched? I didn't flinch. You're scared because you finally met someone you can't manipulate. But don't mistake me for your ally. You chose this. You dragged him into our lives when you sold something that was never yours. Daniel gripped the porch railing so tightly his knuckles whitened. I was drowning in debt. The banks were circling, the creditors wouldn't stop calling. I thought selling the cabin would buy me time, time to rebuild, time to start over. But he wants blood, Evelyn. He wants everything back, plus more. And I don't have it. Then that's your problem, I said evenly. His face twisted with rage, the old Daniel surfacing for a brief, ugly second. Don't act like you're safe. That cabin makes you a target. He doesn't care about papers or deeds, he cares about what he's already sunk into it. And if he can't get his money from me, he'll take it from you. He'll take it from the land. His words cut deeper than I wanted to admit. Grant wasn't a man who let things slide. If he felt cheated, he would claw back every cent, no matter who he had to destroy in the process. I met Daniel's gaze, holding it until his bravado faltered. You're right about one thing. He won't stop until someone pays. But it won't be me. And it won't be this cabin. The law is on my side. Daniel gave a hollow laugh, running a hand through his thinning hair. The law. The law won't protect you from men like him. He doesn't fight in courtrooms, he fights in shadows. And when he decides you're in his way, you'll see exactly what he's capable of. He stepped down from the porch, moving closer. I stood my ground, though every instinct screamed to back away. His voice lowered, almost conspiratorial. We could still fix this, you and I. If you'd just sign it over, sell it cleanly this time, we could both walk away. Split the money, leave the mess behind. I almost laughed at the audacity. You think I'd sell my mother's legacy to bail you out of the mess you made? His eyes narrowed, and the desperation curdled into anger. If you don't, you'll regret it. Mark my words, Evelyn. You're not untouchable. I turned my back on him, walking toward my car without another glance. He shouted something after me, but I let the wind swallow it. His threats no longer scared me, not because they weren't dangerous, but because I had already decided I would never bend. Back at the inn, I found Margaret waiting in the lobby, her face lined with worry. I heard Daniel was at the cabin this morning, she said. He's desperate, I replied, lowering my voice. He thinks Grant will come after me if he can't pay. She studied me for a long moment, then placed a hand on my shoulder. Grant Whitmore is ruthless, yes. But he's also pragmatic. If he believes you're stronger than Daniel, he'll hesitate to cross you directly. Men like him prey on weakness. Don't give him any reason to think you're weak. I nodded, grateful for her steady wisdom. But even as I tried to hold on to her words, unease gnawed at me. Because weakness wasn't always about appearances. Sometimes it was about what you loved, what you refused to lose. And for me, that was the cabin. That night, I drove up to the ridge again, unable to stay away. The moon hung low, casting silver across the lake. The cabin loomed against the dark sky, quiet now, the workers gone. I stood on the porch, running my fingers across the wooden beams my mother had once sanded smooth. For a moment, I allowed myself to breathe. To feel close to her again. To believe the worst had passed. But then headlights cut through the trees. A car pulling into the driveway. I froze, my pulse quickening. The door opened, and a tall figure stepped out. Not Daniel. It was Grant. His shadow stretched long across the gravel as he approached, each step deliberate, unhurried, like a man who knew he controlled the board. You're here alone, he said, his voice low, almost amused. That's brave. Or foolish. I steadied my breath, meeting his gaze. The cabin is mine. I won't let you or Daniel take it from me. His smile was thin, dangerous. You're right about one thing. Daniel is finished. But you, Evelyn, you're still standing between me and what I want. And that's a dangerous place to be. The night air turned colder, the pines whispering around us. I knew then that the real battle hadn't been the town hall or the deed. It was here, in the shadows, face to face with the man who didn't care about laws or legacies. And as he stepped closer, I realized this was only the beginning. The gravel crunched beneath Grant's polished shoes as he came closer, the moonlight catching in his eyes. They gleamed like cold steel, reflecting none of the warmth of the night. I stood still on the porch, my hand resting lightly on the railing, as if my mother's touch lingered there too, steadying me. "You've got courage," he said, his voice even, almost conversational. "But courage alone doesn't keep wolves at bay. I invested money into this place, real money. I'm not walking away empty-handed." I held his gaze. "Then go after Daniel. He's the one who conned you." "Oh, I will," he said with a faint smile. "But men like him vanish when the pressure mounts. You can't squeeze water from a dry sponge. And when he disappears, who's left holding the prize?" He swept his hand toward the cabin, toward the porch, toward everything my mother built. "You." The implication was clear. If Daniel failed to pay, Grant would find a way to extract what he wanted from me. Not legally, not fairly, but through sheer force of intimidation. "I'm not afraid of you," I said quietly, though my heart thundered in my chest. His smile sharpened. "You should be." For a moment, the night stretched taut between us, every sound amplified, the rustle of the pines, the soft lap of water against the shore, the creak of the porch beneath my boots. Then, just as suddenly as he had arrived, he turned and walked back to his car. The engine roared to life, headlights cutting through the trees as he drove away, leaving only silence in his wake. I stood there long after the taillights disappeared, the weight of his threat pressing down like frost. The next morning, Margaret met me at the diner, her expression grim. "Word is spreading fast," she said, stirring her coffee. "Daniel's creditors are circling. He owes money to half the town. And Grant's legal team has already filed suit against him." I shook my head. "That won't save the cabin." "No," she agreed. "But it will bury Daniel. He's desperate now, Evelyn. More desperate than I've ever seen him. That makes him reckless." Her warning proved true that very afternoon. I returned to the cabin to find the front door ajar. My stomach tightened as I stepped inside. The air smelled of stale whiskey and sweat. And there he was, Daniel, sitting slumped in my mother's old rocking chair, a half-empty bottle dangling from his hand. "You have some nerve," I said, my voice sharp. He looked up, his eyes red-rimmed, his face pale. "I didn't know where else to go." "You don't belong here." "This was her place," he said bitterly, his voice cracking. "Your mother's. But she chose you. Always you. Do you know what that felt like? To be treated like an outsider in your own home." "You were an outsider," I snapped. "Because you chose to be. You drained her, Daniel. You took everything she gave and still wanted more." His laugh was hollow, almost a sob. "And you think you're better. You hold on to this place like it's holy ground. But all it is wood and nails. You cling to it because it's the only way you know how to keep her alive." The word struck harder than I wanted to admit. But I didn't let him see it. "Get out," I said firmly. He pushed himself up from the chair, swaying slightly. "If I walk out that door, Grant will finish me. He'll ruin me, Evelyn. And you'll just stand by, watching." "You ruined yourself," I said. His eyes burned with a desperate rage. "If I can't have this place, then no one will." For a heartbeat, silence pressed against us. Then he lunged toward the fireplace, grabbing a box of matches from the mantel. My blood went cold. "Don't," I hissed, stepping forward. His hands trembled, the matchbox shaking as he gripped it. "If I burn it down, Grant gets nothing. You get nothing." Maybe then everyone will finally understand, I was never the fool. I surged forward, ripping the matches from his hand, shoving him back against the wall. He stumbled, the bottle slipping from his grasp and shattering against the floor. The sharp scent of alcohol filled the room, mixing with the crackling fire that still smoldered in the hearth. "Look at you," I spat. "Pathetic. You'd destroy the last piece of her just to prove a point. That's all you ever were, spite wrapped in a suit." He slid down the wall, covering his face with shaking hands. "I don't know what to do," he whispered. "I've lost everything." I stood over him, my breath ragged, the matches clenched tight in my fist. For a moment, I thought of leaving him there to rot in his misery. But his words echoed in my mind, "If I can't have it, no one will, *." He was dangerous, not just to me but to the cabin itself. And as I stepped back into the doorway, the night breeze sweeping through the open door, I knew one thing with certainty: Daniel wasn't finished. Not yet. And if Grant didn't destroy him first, he might just destroy himself, and take the cabin down with him. The cabin felt heavier after Daniel's outburst, as if the walls themselves carried the weight of his madness. I cleaned the shards of glass from the floor, each sweep of the broom echoing in the silence. My mother's sanctuary had nearly become ashes because of him. The thought alone made my stomach twist. By morning, word of Daniel's collapse had spread. At the diner, whispers followed me the moment I walked in. "Did you hear? He's finished. Grant's going to eat him alive." Poor Evelyn, stuck in the middle. Their voices blended into a low hum, a constant reminder that everyone in this town loved a spectacle. Margaret joined me at the booth, her face drawn. "It's happening," she said quietly. "Grant filed criminal charges. Fraud, theft, breach of contract. Daniel has a summons to appear in court." "Good," I said, though my voice felt heavier than I intended. "Good, yes," she said carefully, "but also dangerous. Daniel won't go down quietly. And Grant, he'll use every resource to make an example out of him." Her warning proved true that afternoon. I was walking toward my car when a commotion broke out across the street. Daniel was there, staggering, his suit unbuttoned, his tie hanging limp. His face was ashen, his eyes wild. He shouted at the crowd, his voice cracking. "They're lying to you. I built everything. That cabin should be mine." People recoiled, some muttering, others shaking their heads. He looked nothing like the confident man who used to charm his way through every room. He looked broken. Then a sleek black car rolled up behind him, and the crowd parted like the sea. Grant stepped out, immaculate as ever, his presence commanding silence. "Daniel," he said smoothly, his voice carrying like a blade. "You owe me money. And you owe me respect." Daniel spun on him, spit flying from his lips. "You don't scare me, Whitmore. You think money makes you a god. You think you can just walk into my life and take everything." Grant smiled, calm, cruel. "I don't think. I know." The air thickened. People whispered nervously, shifting on their feet. Daniel's hands shook violently as he pointed at Grant, then at me across the street. "She's behind this. Evelyn. She set me up, she made me the villain." All eyes turned to me. My chest tightened, but I didn't flinch. I stepped forward, my voice steady. "You're the villain because you chose to be. You sold something that wasn't yours. You tried to burn what wasn't yours. You destroyed yourself, Daniel. Don't you dare put that on me." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Daniel's mouth opened, then closed. His shoulders sagged, his fury collapsing into something pitiful. He looked at me as though I had struck him, his lips trembling. Grant took a step closer, his shadow falling over Daniel. "Listen to her," he said softly. You've run out of excuses. Out of money. Out of allies. The only thing you have left is debt. And I always collect my debts. Daniel stumbled back, his voice breaking. Please. Just give me time. I can fix this. I can. Grant leaned in, his words low but cutting. You've already had your time. Now, it's mine. For a moment, silence reigned. The crowd shifted uneasily, watching as Daniel stood on the edge of collapse. Then, without warning, he bolted, shoving through the onlookers, sprinting down the street like a hunted animal. People shouted, startled. Grant didn't move to chase him. He simply straightened his cuffs, his expression unreadable. He won't get far, he murmured. My stomach nodded. Because I knew Grant was right. Daniel was a man running not just from debts but from the truth itself. And men like that always circled back to the one thing they couldn't let go of. That night, I returned to the cabin, unease prickling my skin. The air was still, the lake shimmering beneath the moon. For a brief moment, I allowed myself to believe I was safe. But as I stepped onto the porch, I noticed the door was ajar again. The scent of smoke and stale whiskey hit me like a wave. Daniel had come back. And this time, I knew, he wasn't leaving quietly. The door groaned as I pushed it open, the faint smell of smoke curling through the cabin like a warning. My chest tightened. Inside, the shadows stretched long and uneven, cast by the flicker of a single candle on the table. And there he was, Daniel, sitting in the dark like a specter, his eyes hollow, his hands trembling around a matchbook. You shouldn't be here, I said, my voice sharp, cutting through the silence. He looked up, his face pale and waxy. I had nowhere else to go. His voice cracked, brittle as old wood. They're closing in, Evelyn. The creditors, the banks, Whitmore. They'll take everything. But I can still choose how this ends. My gaze dropped to the matchbook in his hand. My pulse quickened. If you light that, you're not choosing anything. You're just proving everyone right about you. His laugh was broken, almost a sob. You think I care what they think? This cabin, your mother's dream, it's haunted me for years. She gave her love to you, never to me. She built this place for herself, not for us. I could never escape it. So maybe it's better if it all turns to ash. I stepped closer, my voice steady though fear gnawed at my stomach. If you burn it down, you burn the last good thing she ever gave either of us. You'll be nothing but a ghost clinging to your spite. His hands shook harder. The candle flame quivered in the draft, casting jagged shadows across the walls. I already am a ghost, he whispered. In that moment, headlights cut across the window. The rumble of a car door slammed outside. Heavy footsteps crunched against the gravel. And then Grant Whitmore's voice, low and deadly, filled the night. Daniel. Daniel's breath hitched, his eyes wide, the matchbook slipping slightly in his grip. He's here, he muttered. He'll kill me. Grant appeared in the doorway, his silhouette filling the frame. He didn't look at me. His gaze fixed solely on Daniel, calm and unblinking. Put the matches down, he said softly, dangerously. That cabin isn't yours to destroy. Daniel shook his head violently, tears streaking his face. I can't pay you, Grant. I can't give you what you want. This is all I have left. Wrong, Grant said, stepping inside, his voice ablade. What you have left is nothing. What you owe me is everything. And if you think you can erase your debt with fire, you're a fool. The tension snapped tight, the room suffocating. I moved between them, my hands raised. Stop. Both of you. This place isn't a battlefield. It's my mother's home. And I won't let either of you destroy it. Grant's eyes flicked to me, sharp and assessing, before returning to Daniel. You're lucky she's here. Because if it were just you and me, this would already be finished. Daniel crumpled then, his knees buckling as he sank to the floor, sobbing into his hands. The matchbook clattered uselessly across the wooden boards. The fight had gone out of him completely. Grant stood over him, expression unreadable. Then he turned to me. He's yours now. Do what you want with him. But know this, he'll never escape me. Death is a shadow, and it always follows. Without another word, he stepped back into the night, his car engine roaring to life as it carried him away. The cabin fell silent again, save for Daniel's ragged breathing. I stared down at him, this man who had once strutted through life with false confidence, now reduced to a trembling shell. My anger had been a steady fire for so long, but in that moment, all I felt was exhaustion. You destroyed yourself, I said quietly. Not me. Not her. Not Grant. You. He lifted his head, his eyes hollow. What will you do? He croaked. I met his gaze, my voice calm, steady. I'll do what you never could. I'll protect what matters. I walked past him, blowing out the candle as I went. The cabin settled into darkness, safe again, alive with the whispers of my mother's memory. Outside, the night air was sharp, the stars scattered like embers across the sky. Daniel stayed inside, broken and beaten, his fate sealed not by my hand but by his own choices. Grant would destroy what little remained of him. The courts would handle the rest. But me? I stood on the porch, the cold wood beneath my feet, the lake shimmering in the distance. For the first time since my mother's passing, I felt a quiet peace. The cabin was mine. Truly mine. Untouchable. And as the wind rushed through the pines, I knew this fight had never just been about property. It had been about survival. About refusing to let anyone rewrite the story of who my mother was, or who I had become. Daniel thought he could strip me of everything. Grant thought he could intimidate me into silence. But in the end, I was still standing. And the cabin, the heart of my mother's legacy, was still here.